The most stacked and premier divisions in all of combat sports. Normally in combat sports, the heavyweight division in boxing and in MMA was the creme of the crop and was the most entertaining division with the best fighters in the world. But combat sports in MMA has seen a shift in what the premier division has become. And if you ask many fans, the 155-pound lightweight division in the UFC is often quoted as the most stacked division in the world and has become the premier division of the sport. With the biggest names in MMA to undefeated GOAT contenders and a two-weight world champion, this division has seen some legendary fighters hold its prestigious belt. But who are the best of the best? This is the Fight franchise and every UFC lightweight champion ranked from worst to best. Number 12, Sean Sherk. Sean Sherk, also known as the Muscle Shark, Sherk's reign as lightweight champion from 2006 to 2007 came about in interesting fashion, and of all the guys on the list was the most lackluster champion. Sean Sherk began in MMA in 1999 and was one of the many pioneers who was competing in the smaller weight classes. He would be brilliant, winning 19 fights with one draw and being undefeated, earning a welterweight title shot versus Matt Hughes, but lost a decision. Following this loss, he competed across multiple promotions and made his way back to the UFC, losing to GSP, but would beat Nick Diaz in his next bout, where Sherk stated that he would like to go down to lightweight after the division's title was on hold for 4 years. The UFC made a vacant title fight between Sean Sherk and Kenny Florian, where Sherk used his superior wrestling to win a unanimous decision. He would become the second ever UFC lightweight champion and even followed this with the title defense versus Hermes Franca, but after the fight tested positive for nandrolone. Sherk protested the positive test but failed, and at the end of 2007 was stripped of his title, bringing an end to his title reign. He did try and reclaim the belt he never really lost, but failed to reclaim his belt, losing via stoppage to BJ Penn. Sherk, unlike others on this list, actually defended his belt, which people would probably rank him higher for this, but grinding a decision win for the belt and a decision win to defend his title and lose the belt for taking steroids, it's not as inspiring or as impressive as the rest of this list. Number 11, Eddie Alvarez. The Underground King, Eddie Alvarez, is a legendary figure of MMA's lightweight division. He was the inaugural Bellator lightweight champion and had some legendary bouts with Michael Chandler, where he vacated the title after winning it back from Chandler and would jump ship to the UFC. Alvarez's UFC career got off to a rough start, losing a decision to Donald Cowboy Cerrone, but he would win 2 decisions in a row, beating Gilbert Melendez and beating former champion Anthony Pettis, even though he was a massive underdog. This saw him earn a title shot against champ Rafael dos Anjos after dos Anjos failed to show up for a mega fight versus Conor McGregor due to an injury. Alvarez took on dos Anjos at UFC Fight Night 90 for the world title, where Alvarez swarmed dos Anjos in one round and secured the monumental stoppage win to become UFC world champion. From the Bellator lightweight champ to the UFC lightweight champ, Alvarez proved to the world he could do it on the big stage, so the UFC handed him the biggest stage ever, his first title defense in the first ever MSG show for the UFC title against the biggest star the sport had ever seen. He would defend his title against Conor McGregor, who was coming up as the 145-pound champion, and also after some legendary bouts with Nate Diaz. Alvarez had the opportunity to shut up the loudmouth Irishman and grow his star. Conor, however, decimated Alvarez on the feet in one of the best performances in UFC history, and just like that, Alvarez's title reign was over. People will wonder why he ranks higher than Sherk, as he failed to defend his belt unlike Sherk, but the manner in which he won the belt and who it was against is much more impressive than Sean Sherk's title reign. Number 10, Conor McGregor. Notorious himself, Conor McGregor joined the UFC with monumental amounts of hype, where his star was like an avalanche. There was no stopping it. He would become ultra popular with his witty personality and buzzsaw through the featherweight division and beat Chad Mendes for the interim title and would decimate Jose Aldo in 13 seconds to become undisputed champion. Conor McGregor would become a megastar following this and decided to recreate his past history in Cage Warriors and wanted to become a double champion and would opt to face at the time lightweight champ Rafael dos Anjos, which would have been a huge test for McGregor. The two were scheduled to face off at UFC 196, but dos Anjos pulled out due to an injury, and to save the card, the UFC called up Nate Diaz for a fun replacement fight, where Diaz shocked the world, beating McGregor, which caused a detour from his quest for a second bout. McGregor got his win versus Diaz at UFC 202 and would now face new champion Eddie Alvarez for the belt at UFC 205. As the previous entry taught us, McGregor pieced up Alvarez on the feet to become champion and an even bigger star. This seemed like the beginning of what could have become one of the best reigns in the division's history. Instead, McGregor was stripped of the belt while he went to chase the bag in a mega fight versus Floyd Mayweather. Upon his return, Conor would aim to get the belt back he never lost against Khabib, where he got submitted in the 4th round against Khabib, failing to get back his belt. His lightweight career since then has been a disappointment, with 2 losses versus Dustin Poirier, and one of those losses being a horrific injury. McGregor is one of the big what-ifs on this list if he decided to stay and not face Floyd Mayweather, but instead he did give us the biggest title fights in the belt's history. Number 9. Anthony Pettis. Alongside Conor McGregor, Anthony Showtime Pettis was one of the most hyped fighters to ever win the lightweight title. Pettis got started in MMA in 2007 in his hometown of Wisconsin, where he would go 8-0 and be signed by the WEC, a promotion where the smaller weight classes could thrive in the early years of MMA. He would win his debut in the WEC but lose his next bout via decision, giving him his first loss of his career. What followed this was a 4-fight win streak and a moment which took Pettis to superstardom and has put him in MMA folklore. Pettis would win 3 straight, all by stoppage, and then face Benson Henderson in a legendary bout, beating him for WEC lightweight gold, where he would secure his infamous Showtime kick. The WEC was acquired by the UFC and brought over their talent, where Pettis made his UFC debut, losing a decision to Clay Guida. This was a rough start to his UFC career, but Pettis turned it around in his next bout, beating Joe Lozon and Donald Cerrone by stoppage, and history repeated itself. Pettis would face Benson Henderson for lightweight gold, this time in the UFC. Pettis finished Henderson in 1 round via armbar to become the champion, and the UFC had a new star on their hands. Pettis would be pushed by the UFC and their marketing team, where he became the face for the UFC with their partnership with Wheaties. He would defend his title in a brilliant performance against legendary Strikeforce champ Gilbert Melendez, securing the 2nd round guillotine choke. Pettis would defend his title against RDA, where he got whitewashed over 5 rounds and lose a decision. He never hit such lofty heights again, with his career petering out, but one title defense and some iconic history created on his way to the belt gets him a decent spot. Number 8. Rafael dos Anjos. Rafael dos Anjos, when looking at fighters' overall resumes and who they have fought, dos Anjos can be considered for having one of the most arguable stacked resumes in MMA history. Dos Anjos got started in MMA in 2004, competing in Brazil, and slowly made his way to America, and got signed by the biggest organization in the world, the UFC. Upon his arrival in the UFC, he would struggle, losing his first 2, including a KO loss to Jeremy Stevens. He would have mixed success in his UFC career and would lose a decision to Gleison Tibau. Dos Anjos, however, put together a brilliant 5-fight win streak where he would be paired with an undefeated contender at the time, Khabib Nurmagomedov, losing a decision. It was back to the beginning for dos Anjos following his loss against Khabib, where he would win his next 3 fights in the space of 6 months, winning by stoppage against Jason High and finishing former champ Benson Henderson and winning a decision against Nate Diaz. This activity and willingness to fight would pay off for dos Anjos, who earned a title shot for lightweight gold against Anthony Pettis. Dos Anjos put on a brilliant display, beating Pettis over 5 rounds to become undisputed champion and dethroned who many thought would be the future of the division. Dos Anjos followed this up with an excellent win, finishing the ultra-tough Cowboy Cerrone, who was on a brilliant win streak himself. Dos Anjos had the opportunity to build a brilliant title reign and beat Conor McGregor, but pulled out due to an injury, so once he was ready to return, he would be destroyed in 1 round by Eddie Alvarez. RDA ranks higher than the previous entries for actually defending his belt like Pettis, but also managing 2 brilliant runs in the division, which included a huge speed bump in Khabib. Number 7. Jens Pulver. The now Hall of Famer Lil Evil Jens Pulver was the first ever lightweight champ and is a very strange person to rank on this list. Because it was the early days of MMA, many people would say the talent pool he faced was less due to the division being so young compared to now, while others would probably give Pulver credit for being a pioneer in the division's history. Jens competed in his first ever UFC event in 1999, competing at UFC 22. Jens would have 4 fights in the UFC, winning 3 and drawing 1, where he was put in a title bout for the inaugural lightweight title against Carl Uno, where Pulver created history, beating Uno and becoming champion, and ushered in a new era for the UFC and smaller fighters. He would, following this bout, face Dennis Hallman, where Pulver managed to secure the decision win over 5 rounds and defended his belt in a brilliant start to his title reign. His next fight, he took on a fighter with a lot of hype, BJ Penn, who beat Carl Uno in 11 seconds, whereas Pulver went to a 5-round decision against him. Pulver took on Penn in a competitive fight, where Jens was too much to handle for the inexperienced Penn, who was fighting for the title in the 4th fight of his career. This is seen as the high point of Jens Pulver's title reign, and it was unfortunately the end. Pulver left the UFC over contract disputes and pay, bringing an unfortunate end to his title reign, where the division was put on pause until 2003, where the UFC even then failed to crown a new champion. Pulver never reached such lofty heights in his career again, but who knows, he could have potentially built him a legacy which got him number 1 spot had the UFC paid him more. But with 2 title defenses, he deserves a higher rank than all the previous entries before him. Number 6. Frankie Edgar. If there is one fighter on this list who had no right being champ and defied expectations, it it is Frankie Edgar. Edgar got started in the UFC in 2007 and would compete in the lightweight division, where he showed amazing heart and a tenacious will to win. He would win his first 3 in the promotion and then lose a 3-round decision to Gray Maynard, who would later become a huge part of his career and success as a champion. Frankie Edgar would win 2 decisions and secure a brilliant rear naked choke win to earn a title shot against, at the time, the best fighter this division had ever seen, BJ Penn. BJ Penn was a massive favourite and attempting to secure his 4th title defence and one of the best fighters in the UFC at the time, taking on a game and tough undersized underdog in Frankie Edgar. Edgar did brilliantly, dominating BJ Penn at UFC 112, where he would secure the unanimous decision and dethrone the seemingly unbeatable Penn, and proved all the doubters wrong, becoming champion. With Penn being a star and a great champ, he earned an instant rematch, where history 4 months later repeated itself, with Edgar winning another decision, truly ending the era of BJ Penn and ushering in the new era of lightweights. This saw Edgar having to defend his title against the only person who had ever beat him at that point of his career, which was Gray Maynard. Both men went to war in a legendary bout, with Edgar facing multiple moments of adversity, being rocked and dropped by Maynard, but Frankie never quit and fought to the bitter end, where the scorecards would be all over the place, with the bout being scored a draw. Edgar would defend his title in the trilogy bout versus Gray Maynard, where he would this time leave no room for doubt on who was the better fighter. In a competitive fight, Edgar would KO and finish Maynard in the 4th round. His next title defense was against Benson Henderson, with the two facing off in a competitive fight, but Edgar would lose his title in a close decision. Being a great champ and having a competitive fight with Henderson, the two rematched 6 months later, with Henderson winning this time a split decision. Edgar was a tenacious, never back down champ. He was never finished and put on some great 5-round fights, and being undersized at lightweight and competing with much bigger guys definitely deserves huge credit when it comes to this list. Number 5. Islam Makhachev, the current champ, and after his recent legendary performance, a big reason why this list has been made. Islam Makhachev is quite the strange character to rank at the moment, as he has all the makings of an amazing champion and could potentially be number 1 on this list. But when you dissect his path to the belt, others have had it way harder. Makhachev followed in his teammate and close friend Khabib's footsteps and competed in MMA and the UFC. Islam over his career has drew many similar comparisons to Khabib and has even been held to a similar standard. He got started in the UFC in 2015 and won his first fight via submission, but then would face at the time of recording this list the only loss of his career, a KO to the hands of Adriano Martins. What followed this loss has been a streak which could well become the longest in lightweight history and in fact UFC history. Islam would win 10 in a row with some brilliant wins and stoppages. There was just one problem: he didn't beat any notable names in the top 10 except Dan Hooker. So it does seem of all the guys on this list, he did have an easier path to the title and did skip the killers of the division like Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler and Beneil Dariush. He would face one of the most exciting fighters in lightweight history, and you could say MMA history, Charles Oliveira, who truly made the belt relevant after Khabib's retirement. Islam would school Oliveira on the feet and on the ground, where he dropped him in the 2nd round and submitted him with an arm triangle to become champ and end Oliveira's legendary streak. Islam has secured 2 title defenses, both against Alex Volkanovski, who has come up from featherweight looking to become a double champion. The first fight, a competitive war, which Islam won the decision, but many did think Volk deserved the nod. Islam was scheduled to rematch Oliveira, who pulled out due to an injury, where Volk stepped in on short notice, and when they faced off the second time, Islam showed another level of his game, securing a brutal head kick and finishing Volk with strikes. Right now, with 2 defenses against a pound for pound great, a win over a dominant fighter in Oliveira and on a 13-fight win streak, Islam is ranked pretty fairly, but in a few fights time he could easily climb this list and maybe eventually even become number 1. Number 4, Charles Oliveira. Easily one of the most inspirational fighters on this list, however it hasn't always been smooth sailing for the Bronx. Charles got started in MMA at a young age in Brazil and would get signed by the UFC and compete in the featherweight division, where he would have mixed success, managing to secure some decent wins, only to lose a few, some in devastating ways. The consensus during this time at featherweight was that Charles Oliveira, when things got tough and someone brought the fight to him, he would quit. Amongst this was some failed weight cuts, which made people and Charles himself think was featherweight even for him. Charles made the clever decision to move up to lightweight, which began arguably the best lightweight win streak in UFC history. Charles would massacre the competition, securing 7 finishes in a row, and would run into Tony Ferguson, where he would dominate Ferguson and win a 3-round decision. After Khabib retired from the sport, the UFC would make a fight for vacant gold between Chandler and Oliveira, where Oliveira reactivated his finishing ability and KO'd Chandler in the 2nd round. He would then follow this up with a brilliant submission win versus Dustin Poirier in a competitive competitive fight, and then faced Justin Gaethje, which had controversy on the scale, where Oliveira missed weight by 0.5 of a pound. This saw Oliveira stripped of the belt. He fought Gaethje in a one-round war where he was dropped but came back and dropped Gaethje himself and then secured the rear naked choke against him. After Khabib's retirement, we all thought no one could fill his shoes, and Charles managed that with his amazing fight style and stoppage wins. He lost to the previously mentioned Islam Makhachev but has come back and beat a high-level contender in Beneil Dariush by KO in one round. Many would think Islam would rank higher for beating Oliveira, but not yet. Due to the opposition faced and strength of opposition, Oliveira ranks higher for now, but a brilliant win for Islam versus Gaethje or Oliveira himself, he could jump higher. But who knows? Maybe Oliveira can capture back his belt and manage to go on another streak and get number 1 on this list. Number 3, Benson Henderson, one of the more forgotten legends and champions when it comes to the lightweight division. But Benson Henderson deserves massive respect and credit for what he was able to achieve in his UFC career and in the lightweight division. He got started in MMA in 2006 and would after 2 years make his way into the WEC, where he won the interim lightweight title in a bout versus Donald Cerrone and would unify the WEC lightweight title in his next bout versus Jamie Varner. He would rematch Cerrone for his first title defense in the WEC and would be brilliant securing the first round submission. But he would run into the previously mentioned Anthony Pettis, who showtime kicked Henderson and would win a decision. The UFC acquired the WEC and all of their talent, which included Benson Henderson. He would do brilliant, winning 3 on the bounce once entering the UFC and would earn a title shot versus Frankie Edgar, where Benson Henderson was just a step ahead of Frankie Edgar and did enough to win the UFC lightweight title. With Frankie Edgar having 2 successful title defenses with 1 draw, he would be in line for an instant rematch, where Henderson repeated his brilliance, this time defending his title but via split decision. Securing the title and now defending it, Henderson was looking for fresh matchups and would defend his title this time against Stockton's finest, Nate Diaz, winning via unanimous decision in a dominant display of mixed martial arts. The UFC acquired Strikeforce and brought over their talent and champs, including Strikeforce lightweight champ Gilbert Melendez, where both men fought in a unification bout, where in a close and competitive fight, Benson Henderson won the close decision win. This would tie Henderson with the record of most title defenses in UFC lightweight history. However, history repeated itself with Anthony Pettis ending his UFC title reign like he did in the WEC. Benson Henderson is an often forgotten champion of this division, and it is strange why, as he has some incredible wins and title defenses. It may be because his UFC run to the title and title defenses were all decisions, where during his time in the WEC he was securing finishes. Maybe if he had those definitive fight winning moments in the UFC, he could creep higher on this list. Nonetheless, a bronze medal in this division as of now is an amazing spot. Number 2, BJ Penn. An MMA and UFC legend, BJ Penn is a fighter who has had a storied career, with many hardcore MMA fans and pundits having him in their top 10 of all time. BJ Penn got started in MMA early on, making his pro debut in the UFC at UFC 31. BJ Penn would win his first 3 fights by a stoppage, including an incredible 11-second win over Carl Luna. This rapid rise to stardom and his finishing ability saw Penn earn a shot for the lightweight gold versus inaugural champ Jens Pulver. BJ Penn would have a great fight versus Pulver but lost a majority decision, where many considered him just to be too inexperienced for the highest level of MMA at the time. After Pulver left the UFC, a tournament was booked between Din Thomas, Carl Uno, Matt Serra and BJ Penn. Uno beat Din Thomas and Penn beat Serra, making a rematch between the two. Many thought BJ would easily beat Uno again, as the first fight was an 11-second domination from BJ Penn. This time they fought to a draw, failing to crown a new champion in Pulver's absence. This saw Penn move up to welterweight and claim the welterweight title, but right after he would leave to compete in K1. He came back to the UFC and competed at welterweight, but lost both to GSP and Matt Hughes. He would return to lightweight and beat former champion Jens Pulver, and then in Sean Sherk's absence compete for vacant gold and take on Joe Stevenson, where Penn put on a legendary performance, securing the iconic submission in the second round and won the lightweight title and his second belt in a second division in the UFC. This led him to face Sean Sherk, the previous champ, after his suspension was up, where Penn did brilliant again, finishing Sherk in the third round to defend his title. Penn went on a detour and faced GSP for welterweight gold, but Penn came up short in his attempt to hold simultaneous belts, being finished in the fourth round. He would move back down to lightweight and defended his title 2 more times, where he finished Kenny Florian and Diego Sanchez to set the record number of title defenses in the division. He lost his next title defense to Frankie Edgar, losing his belt, and failed to earn it back in the rematch against Edgar. His career would fall off following these bouts, but his title reign was amazing with the record number of title defenses, and unlike Benson Henderson securing stoppages and definitive wins, you can genuinely argue him as number 1, and I wouldn't blame you. It's just number 1 arguably didn't even lose a round while competing in this division. Number 1, Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's right. Many modern fans number 1 in this division's history, and to be honest with them, I have to agree. Yes, Penn you can argue is number 1, but what Khabib achieved in the lightweight division is unbelievable, and we may never see anything like that again. Khabib joined the UFC in 2012 with a lot of hype and would take on Kamal Chalarus, where he won via submission. He won in an infamous fight versus Gleison Tibau, which many consider him losing, but all 3 judges gave him all 3 rounds. He secured some great wins following this, which included previously mentioned Rafael dos Anjos. During this time, Khabib suffered from multiple injuries and struggles with weight cuts, but he would reach 23-0 and would dominate Michael Johnson and submit him, where he was scheduled to face Tony Ferguson, but suffered from issues around his weight cut. He returned at UFC 219, where Khabib came back with a vengeance. He destroyed Edson Barboza in a 3-round fight in one of the most brutal beatdowns in MMA history, which took him to 25-0, where he would face Tony Ferguson for lightweight gold due to Conor's absence. Ferguson during fight week doing media tripped over a wire and would be out of the title fight, so this led the UFC to book short notice Ally Quinta, where Khabib dominated him over 5 rounds to win the vacant belt. This would see a unification bout between former champ Conor McGregor returning versus Khabib, where they squared off in the biggest event in UFC history, where Khabib dominated most of the fight and would submit Conor in the 4th round, giving Conor his first loss in a world title fight. He would jump the cage after the fight and attack Conor McGregor's team and would have to serve a 9-month suspension, which led to a new title challenger emerging, which was the interim champ Dustin Poirier, who just won versus Max Holloway. Dustin would have moments in the fight, trying to lock up a guillotine, but after he failed this, would be choked out himself in the 3rd round. He would be booked to finally face Tony Ferguson again, but the fight was brought to a halt due to global circumstances. This caused Tony to face Justin Gaethje for interim gold, where Gaethje battered Ferguson and earned a title shot, where Khabib faced Gaethje and put on a Terminator-like performance, hunting down Gaethje and pressuring forward all the way into the 2nd round. After eating punches and leg kicks from Gaethje, he would take him down and submit him in the 2nd round. Khabib after the fight retired due to the passing of his father, finishing his career at 29-0 with 13 wins at lightweight and matching the record of title defenses in the division. Khabib, if we are being honest, if he stayed, could have probably got another 5 title defenses, and if he returned today, he may even be the top 2 in the division. Nonetheless, being undefeated, a 13-0 win streak in the division against the best, barely getting hurt and not getting cut, and arguably not losing a round, gets him number 1 as the best lightweight champ in UFC history. Did you enjoy the video? Let us know down in the comments below. Who do you think is the best UFC lightweight champion of all time? Put that down in the comments below. And what would be your ranking of champions? Put that down in the comments below. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe for more MMA and fight content coming soon. And if you've got any video ideas or anything you want me to do or try, put that down in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed the video and we'll catch you in the next one.